when I was diagnosed at 25, I thought that, oh, in a couple years I'll have my normal life back. But it just changes your perspective. It changes your body. Like, it's a different normal. It's right now I'm at a great normal. I'm the happiest I've ever been, but it's definitely more than just a physical illness that people think it is.
Welcome, everybody, to the Cancer Athlete Podcast. My name is Mike, and thank you for checking out today's episode. Today, we sit down with Kevin Bohn. He is a stomach cancer survivor and athlete, and he has a very inspirational story full of highs and lows. Kevin opens up about his personal struggles with addiction and mental health during emergency medical procedures and long-term hospital treatment. I admire Kevin's honesty as topics and issues such as mental health and addiction are often brushed aside and overlooked. They deserve more open conversation, and I appreciate and value Kevin's transparency today. Before we begin, if you or anyone that you know is struggling with addiction, mental health issues, or any crisis, just know that there is support available to you. One way is by reaching out to the 988 Lifeline for free and confidential assistance. Simply call or text 988 for immediate help and access to prevention and crisis resources. Now let's roll right into Kevin Bohn's remarkable journey here on the Cancer Athlete Podcast. Kevin, hey, what's up, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, man. Hey, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and joining us on the Cancer Athlete Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to be here and share my story and hopefully inspire some of those people out there. So thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think real quick, I'll give a shout out to Dylan. He kind of connected the two of us. So for anybody, if you've watched the first episode, Dylan, after we recorded, reached out and said, hey, I want to connect you with Kevin. He's got an awesome story. He's got a wild story. So thank you, Dylan. Appreciate it. And shout out to you, buddy.
Thanks.
So, yeah. And so, you and I kind of briefly touched base and you shared a little bit of your story. And I think we just got to dive in.
Yeah.
You've got a pretty big story. And so just like high level, kind of and you're going to correct me where I'm wrong and fill me in as we go, but kind of a relatively unexpected diagnosis, stage 4 lymphoma. There were multiple emergency procedures that quickly came about, a pretty long recovery road, and not all great and wonderful, right? There was a lot of highs and lows through that. And then kind of where we are currently, we're definitely, doing better than we were at that point. And we've got some big goals coming up, which I'll have you share about, and kind of a longer term goal for 2024. We've committed to do, you've committed to do a full marathon in 2024. So
it's a team effort.
Yeah, I'll be supporting you right here on Strava, dude. So,
Thanks,
so if you would, let's kind of back up, and you kind of pick that spot, but let's talk about that initial point of kind of the discovery and diagnosis. And let's just go from there.
So, in my opinion, I think I waited way too long to even take action on the symptoms that I was feeling. I was, coughing a lot, couldn't even laugh without coughing. In some instances, like coughing up blood. I was like, it could just be bronchitis. I was 25 and young, thinking like I was invincible, like most 25-year-olds do at that age. So,
right.
eventually went to the doctor, and he started asking like very specific questions that I like was random, like, oh yeah, that's happening. Like, do you get night sweats? Do you get short of breath when you're walking upstairs? Like all of these random like questions that I didn't see coming. And
Right.
he
Yeah.
immediately was like, yeah, we should definitely get a chest x-ray. So I got a chest x-ray that day. And then 2 weeks later, he was like, yeah, there's definitely something there. I'm going to recommend you to UCSF because I was living in San Francisco at the time.
Okay.
Um, and I'm so glad it was UCSF because they're one of the best cancer centers in the country. So I got very lucky with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, and then from there, I ended up meeting my oncologist for the first time. Um, we were, my family and I and my loved ones, we were very concerned that it was lung cancer going into it.
Okay. Yeah.
So when we met with the oncologist, she was like, I have good news. It's lymphoma. It's one of the more gentle, curable cancers. You know, you might even feel better during chemo than you do right now. Because I was in a pretty rough spot by the time we were at this point.
Okay.
Um, so we were optimistic. We were happy. Like, this was great news. They didn't have the exact type of lymphoma yet. So then I started the biopsy processes to figure out what type it is.
Okay.
The first biopsy I had was like a needle neck biopsy that came back inconclusive because I had a tumor in my neck as well. Then they tried to go for the tumor in my lung, but they tried to do it the least invasive way that they could, which unfortunately for me meant a super long needle that they just kind of stab into your chest and try to suck it out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and unfortunately with that procedure, they can't sedate you at all because they need you breathing in rhythm with when they're sticking the needle in. So you feel pretty much
Oh, that
all of it.
sounds like torture.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds torturous.
Yeah, I mean, and in the grand scheme of things, that's not even bad compared to the rest of the stuff I had to go to, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
That one also came back inconclusive yet again. So their last attempt at a biopsy was they ended up cutting me right here and going down through my rib cage to my lung and pulling parts of the tumor out that way. And so this process of all of these biopsies took a few weeks. So the cancer's obviously, it's not like it's shrinking over
Yeah.
this period of time.
Right.
Um, and I didn't find out what stage it was until the day before I started chemo. So
Yeah. So what was the initial or the official diagnosis?
the official diagnosis was diffuse large B cell lymphoma. It's DLBCL. It's a non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Usually very treatable. Usually not an aggressive one. Which
And where were you at on that? Like what stage?
what's that?
And like what stage when you found out, were you stage 2, stage 3? Like where were you?
So since the biopsy process took so long, by the time they could actually figure out like how aggressive this cancer was and like where it is all in my body, my oncologist was like, "Yep, this is stage 4. We're starting
Oh, wow.
chemo tomorrow." And I was like, "Oh my god, like I'm 25 and have stage 4 cancer? Like what is happening?" Um
Yeah.
because like I said, when they told me it was lymphoma, I was relieved. Like she said it's a gentle cancer, it's so curable, but yeah, that was definitely shocking, hard hitting, but the timing of it was kind of good because I knew I was starting chemo the very next day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, okay, here's the problem. The solution starts tomorrow, you know?
That's rough. To as I hear you say that, like that was the good news, but as you said, it could have been lung cancer or multiple other things there. So, what when that initial like that first diagnosis and you hear that word cancer, what were some of the thoughts going through your head at that time? Because
Um,
you were 25 years old. That's not common at all.
yeah. Uh, I before my first like initial appointments with oncologists, um, after I was leaning towards with my PCP, it was leaning towards this being cancer.
Hmm.
Um, I was like, I had a lot of regrets on things that I've done in the past because I didn't live the healthiest life in college.
Sure.
Um, like to party a lot, and I thought, wow, I definitely just ruined my life by all my decisions. Um, and then actually one of my first meetings with an oncologist, he said, "Just so you know, this has nothing to do with anything that you've done in the past or your environment. It's just a freak mutation of a cell. So please don't hold this over your head." And then from there, it was like a big weight lifted off of my shoulders. And I didn't feel responsible for anything at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. So after you got the diagnosis, you said you started chemo the next day. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what was the plan going forward?
So the plan was I was going to do R-CHOP chemotherapy. We were going to do one round to see if it worked. If it didn't work, we were going to have to do radiation. So we started chemo on May 16th. And then about 6 days later, on the 24th, is kind of where things took a turn. Um, if you want me to give you a little play by play of what happened there.
Yeah, so, okay, you're a week in on chemo,
Mhm.
which, I for me, that's kinda when I was starting to approach kind of the low point,
Yeah.
as far as, like, it's doing its thing, it's been doing its thing for, like, a week, your blood cell counts are going down and everything, so what was going on for you?
So yeah, I definitely felt the same during that first week, but I just kind of felt it happening really fast. And I was
Okay,
on like Reddit pages about lymphoma and chemotherapy and all that, and it didn't really sound like it should be making me feel this bad this quickly.
okay,
Um, and I was having a lot of like stomach pain and like losing consciousness, things like that.
mm,
Um, and then Friday morning of the 24th, I um, could feel myself losing consciousness while I was sleeping. So I had a bell next to my bed that I was living with my parents while I was going through treatment.
okay,
I had a bell next to my bed and I just started shaking the bell and they came running in and I was like completely losing consciousness. Ended up throwing up a bunch of blood. They called 911 and the ambulance showed up, put a couple of IVs in me and took me to UCSF. Um, but I was losing so much blood that they couldn't really transport me anywhere once I was in the ER. So they had to like pump me with blood until I was stable enough to go to interventional radiation so that they could embolize the internal bleeding.
wow,
Yeah, and so the internal bleeding all started because the tumor was so attached to the stomach tissue and the lining that when the chemo started to do its job and shrink the tumor, it just kind of deteriorated the stomach wall and tissue and
oh,
everything as well.
yeah,
And there's
wow,
nowhere else for that blood to go. Um, so they were able to embolize that that Friday. It was a successful surgery. We were all in high spirits. I was back up in the ICU at that point after that procedure.
okay,
Um, the next day, I felt great. I had visitors in the ICU. They wanted to move me down to the oncology floor and everything. Like they thought, like the tough part's over. Now it's just let's focus on chemo and get him treated for his cancer.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so then on Sunday, I moved down to oncology, but something just like didn't feel right. Like it within my abdomen, like it was the pain and discomfort, and like something was up. Um, but I, just kind of trusted the doctors, went down to the oncology floor. But then the next morning, actually, I woke up and started throwing up blood again. So
Man.
obviously the procedure didn't work. I was bleeding again. So they had to get the biggest gauge IVs that they had in both arms, and they had nurses on each side pumping the blood to get it in as fast as they could. And then they had other nurses running to the blood bank with coolers, making trips back and forth so that they could constantly be giving me blood so that would be
Wow.
stable enough to get the CT scan.
Oh, man. That sounds pretty critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you do you have any idea, like, how much, like, volume of blood that was either coming in or going out? Like
I do have the number actually. Yeah. It's crazy. 85 units of blood over
Mm,
60 hours.
man.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
That's
so, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just saying that's, uh, unheard of. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Please, keep going.
while they were pumping this blood and everything, this is when I coded for the first time, which, means that I was no longer conscious or breathing. So the nurse began chest compressions to save my life. And once she had done that, I lost consciousness during this part, and this is when they started the medically induced coma that
Wow.
lasted for 2.5 days.
Wow.
And this is also when they put in the breathing tube. Um, so they wanted to bring me back to interventional radiation to try to embolize it for the second time, but they were like, "There's no way if we wheel him out of this room that he's gonna make it onto that table. Like, there's no way." So they had a whole plan of all doctors and nurses had every specific job surrounding me. And when I got into the elevator to go to the operating room, I coded again.
Mm,
So they started chest compressions again, um, and then made it through that. I and don't know how.
yeah.
Got to the operating room, and then while I was laying on my bed, and they were transferring me to the operating table,
Yeah.
the way I was laying was kind of compressing the ruptured uh, blood vessel. So it was kind of keeping things intact. So when they lifted me and moved me, it just kind of ruptured completely. So
Man.
then I coded again on the operating table, and they ended up embolizing again, and it was a successful embolization. Um, and then they moved me back up to ICU. Um, that night after the second embolization, they were still had to pump me with blood because they could just tell, like this isn't working. Like we can't sustain this. There's no way.
Wow.
So then Tuesday, once I was stable enough from receiving all of the blood, um, IR was like, we've done everything we can. Like we either take his stomach and spleen or he's not gonna make it.
Okay.
Um, and so since I was in a coma at this point, they pulled my family into a room and they said, we have to perform this surgery or he's not going to make it. And
Yeah.
so they had to have the conversation of what would I want my quality of life to be versus, not making it. So I guess it was pretty split. My brother and my dad were like, I don't care how, even if he's like a vegetable after this, like just whatever, we can make it work. And then my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and my mom were kind of concerned because they know how much being active and doing sports and exercises, like make me happy. So
Yeah.
they ended up asking the doctors, like, will he be able to snowboard again? Can he skateboard again? Will he be able to
Yeah.
run again? And after they all like confirmed that I would still be able to do those things, they said, okay, great, go for it. And then they literally took me down right as they got the okay. The doctors were all waiting outside the conference room to get that okay.
Yeah.
So then I went down for the 5-hour surgery, got the stomach and spleen removed successfully. However, I was still in critical condition, back in the ICU, still in an induced coma, still intubated. Um, which brings me to the next day is when they decided to take me off the sedatives, which was another pretty scary experience for not just me, for my loved ones as well. Uh, they took me off the sedatives in the morning, I believe. And when you're in an induced coma for as long as I was, they don't know how much it affects the brain function, or anything like that. So they didn't know if they were getting like me back, like, or if it
Sure.
was
Yeah.
my moods could be different, like my personality could have changed. So it took me off the sedatives, and it was a grueling 3 hours before I was responsive after that.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and I'll have you jump back in the story, but you just threw that out. I'm very curious. There are potential changes coming out of a coma. Did you experience any of that? Like you didn't wake up with a British accent or anything, but in any ramifications from being in the coma for several days?
I just experienced some pretty gnarly hallucinations, um,
Okay.
mostly like auditorial. Like I would hear like just the drums from a certain Jack Johnson song, or like just the bass line from this song. Like it was weird. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um yeah, that was pretty weird.
Wow. So after it was 3 hours, you're starting to come around.
Mhm.
Dive back in right there.
Yeah, so then the next step, now that I was awake and could kind of communicate with my eyes, still had the breathing tube in. So they wanted to do a breathing test to see if we could remove the breathing tube. So I'm fully awake and like conscious of everything. But
Are you aware of the surgery that took place at
no,
that
so that's
point?
what I was about to get into. There
Yeah.
was a sign in front of my door that said, in the ICU, that said, patient is unaware of gastrectomy. Please do not tell him, or something along those lines. Because
Wow.
they
Yeah.
wanted to wait until I was off the ventilator so I could actually talk and ask questions and, really get a
Yeah.
feel for what happened.
Yeah.
Um, so I started day one of the breathing test to get off of the ventilator, and this test is pretty brutal, especially when you have fluid in your lungs. The so I did it for 1 hour the first day, and I didn't pass. The second day was 2 hours, also didn't pass. But on that second day, a nurse got me a letter board that I could communicate with.
Okay.
And I guess the first thing that I wrote on it is, "Am I gonna make it?" And the doctors said confidently, like, "Yeah, we think you're gonna make it." So at that point, I was like, "All right, I know we got a long road ahead, but let's do it." So
Yeah.
that got me fired up for the next day when I had to do the 5-hour breathing test. And the way they do it is you have to be able to they lower the amount of oxygen they're giving you through the ventilator, So you're
Okay.
trying to take as deep of breaths as you possibly can without, any help from the machine. But keep in mind, they thought I might have broken ribs from the chest compression. I just had surgery on my stomach and spleen. Like any kind of
Yeah.
expansion of the chest was just excruciating.
Yeah.
So I did 5 hours of that. Didn't pass again. That day is when they added the feeding tube, which I had for months. Um, then the next day, another breathing test didn't pass. Um, 2 days later was my fifth breathing test, also didn't pass. And then
Hmm.
finally, after the sixth breathing test, I passed and they got the tube out, and it was like one of the biggest reliefs ever.
Yeah. I bet that felt great.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then at that point, um, I was able to start asking questions. I met with the surgeon that did the surgery, and learned about what life was going to be like without a stomach. And I don't think I fully like grasped or wanted to believe that like my life is forever changed now. Like I'm a 25-year-old kid. Like I wanted to just go back to hanging out with my friends and like eating and
Yeah.
drinking whatever I want. Like now it's that's just not a possibility. So that was a pretty hard hitting reality for sure.
So, what were some of the things? Okay, you had a full gastrectomy
Yep.
and they removed the spleen. So, from what I understand, they completely removed the stomach, reattached the esophagus to the is it the small intestine
Yep.
directly there.
Yep.
So what was the doctor sharing as far as what the future is going to look like, and now I say the new norm or the accommodations that you're going to have to start learning to work with.
Yeah. He basically told me you're never going to be able to drink liquids while you eat a meal. Kind of have to choose one or the other, which is pretty tough. Small meals throughout the day, um, vitamins, um, and I guess the risk of alcohol overdose is way higher without a stomach because it just goes straight into your small intestine. So had to stop drinking as well, which ended up being a great thing for me actually. But
That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, um, there was a minor complication because they had to rush the gastrectomy so much. They where it connected the esophagus to the small intestine, there was a little gap like that. So they had to they wanted it to heal on its own. So they put in a little drain right at that connection point that I could see fill with liquid when things would leak out of there. Um,
And it just heals in, like closes in and heals up,
yeah, and so I had to get endoscopies regularly to get, check on how it was healing.
monitor it and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah.
And while all
Yeah.
this was going on, my oncologist was like, "We need to start his second cycle of chemo. Like he's
Oh,
got
man.
stage 4 cancer." And all
Yeah.
of the surgeons were like, "No, he just had life-saving surgery. He needs to recover." Like, so their solution was to put a metal stent in where the junction was.
Okay.
That way, it would kind of protect it from bacteria, things like that, infection, and then start me on my second round of chemo.
So the stent does it just kind of isolates it so it doesn't get exposed to the chemo, or
Yeah, I'm
like
not
what was
quite sure how it works, but that's
yeah,
that's that's how they agreed upon it.
okay. That that's interesting.
I
Wow.
I hated the stent. It just made me so paranoid because you hear stories of people's stents moving. And so I was constantly in fear of my stent getting out of place. And it actually had moved a couple of instances too. But yeah, that wasn't too bad.
So then you right back into the chemo journey again. How long had that been between like round one,
So I started
surgery, and then this one?
so yeah, started chemo on the 16th of May, and then didn't start my second round until the second or third week of June.
So go from there. I mean, at that point, where you're trying to you're fighting two battles. I mean, you're trying to recover from this emergency and very extensive surgery, but then just the cancer battle in itself and dealing with chemo and trying to get through that and recover is huge in itself. So what did, going from there, what did the next couple weeks look like?
So my even just my cancer journey wasn't the smoothest, but without the whole surgery thing. So where my tumor on my lung was placed in my chest, um, it was really close to the heart, so they couldn't put in a port because it was just too close to the heart. They were worried it would damage arteries leading away or to the heart. So I had to get a PICC line,
Okay.
and a PICC line they put in your groin, and it goes all the way up. And they use a CT machine to track how far they're going up, and they put it like right below my heart. And the bummer about a PICC line is you're not allowed to leave the hospital with a PICC line in. So that was
That was going to be my question was, how much can you move around and or at all, or what is that? What impact does that have?
yeah. So I was in the ICU for 12 days, and then they did the PICC line thing. Um, and that's when I started to like try to walk again, which was, yeah, it was brutal. I started with like 5 steps, and they have this big like structure with wheels on it that you kind of like prop yourself up on and just slowly move.
Okay.
So I would start just like 5 steps, then the next day, like 10 steps. And then at one point I was doing like a full lap with it. And it was great when my buddies would come visit and cheer me on when I was doing laps with that thing. So that was cool.
Yeah.
Um, but so yeah, with having to use this stent, I mean the PICC line instead of a port, I kind of had no choice but to do my whole chemotherapy process in the hospital
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
needed to. So I was under the care of both surgical and oncologists at that point. So I would meet
Yeah.
with the surgery teams in the morning and then oncology in the afternoon. And both of them were like, "Yeah, you're not going to get out of here for a while," which
Well, yeah.
as a 25-year-old guy, and it's like summer and all my friends are going to music festivals and 4th of July, it's just like, man, it's tough on the brain.
So obviously a lot of turns on the road along the way, but initially they were thinking this was a couple week process, and so how long did that end up being
Uh,
that you were in the hospital?
until That's a good question. I think until October.
Wow, so we're like May to October,
Yeah.
man.
I think I had
So
I think I had like a 2-day stretch outside of the hospital, but my stent moved, so I had to go back in.
wow. So I would say anybody that's listening right now, it just clicked over. It's November 1st. So we just had October. Think back to May. That's a long time,
Mhm.
and how was that for you? Just like mentally and um, trying to keep your spirits up and everything, and just being in the hospital for months.
Yeah. So at first it was like, I want my friends here all the time. I want visitors always. I wanted to kind of just distract myself. But after a while, I was just like so tired, and it was just so straining to even just like have them come, and then I'll be too tired to even talk. So they're just like staring at me, and then I'll start throwing up into a cup, and like I don't want them to see me like that. But
Yeah.
so after a couple months, it was more of like a I kind of just wanted alone time. I wanted to focus up. Um, Watched a lot of YouTube, which helped.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but it's just not being able to get up and not being able to eat or drink. I didn't have water for 30 days because of the surgery.
Wow. Wow. So they hydrate with the IV or
Yeah. And
yeah.
then when I was allowed to have water, they had a little sponge on a stick that they would dip in a cup of water, and I would just get to suck on a sponge.
Wow. And what about my journey being in the hospital? One of the worst experiences was the food. So at that point, are how are they feeding you?
Just
What are
through
you
the
able to
feeding
eat?
tube.
Yeah,
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 so I had the feeding tube. Even when I was discharged, I had the feeding tube. So I had a little backpack that had the pump running. So I was on the feeding tube for months, probably like 6 months.
wow, yeah. So, uh, did you have additional chemo? Like, because I think I saw you did at least 3 rounds. Is that correct?
I did 6.
Oh
Yes.
gosh. Okay. And, I mean, you could kinda walk through some of those if one of them stands out, and then let's kinda start going to the point where, you know, eventually you're getting discharged and what life outside of the hospital is gonna start looking like for you.
Yeah. So, um, it was tough because the stomach thing, like the surgery combination with the chemo made things really difficult because even if I was having like how there's good days and bad days when you're going through chemo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a lot of the times it would overlap bad surgical day, bad chemo day. Like
Of cour of course, Kevin.
yeah,
None of your journey went easy,
yeah.
so you're getting double whammies.
Yeah, so I mean, I just learned to, by the I would say 5th cycle of chemo, I would finally have days where like the good days would line up. And I think I remember telling my family like, "Wow, this is the first day that I would say I feel actually kind of normal." And I that gave me so much hope. Um, and I remember it was during that round of chemo when just sitting in bed, the only exercise I was getting was like physical therapy, which was not much.
Yeah.
All I wanted was to be like out in the sun, exercising, just sweaty. Like that's all I wanted.
Yeah.
Like a good workout, some sunshine, and just like a nice sweat. I was like craving it. Um, but I didn't even end up getting that for years after.
Yeah. So, and how long until from there, until they finally let you go? You said it was in October. Is that when you got discharged?
Yeah, that was after my 6th round. Got discharged. But at this point, I was almost in complete remission. Had
Okay.
my PET scan in December. So December 10th of 2019, I was declared officially in complete remission. So my 4 years is
Awesome.
coming up next month. Um,
Hey,
yeah,
congratulations. Yeah.
thank you. But because of the surgery, I was on a very heavy dose of painkillers um, throughout the whole hospital stay. So that's months of, and they had to keep upping the dose because you build a tolerance to it.
Yeah.
So I was up to like a scary amount of painkillers a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, So once I was discharged from the hospital, the next focus was, okay, how can we get him off of these painkillers, which I had become totally dependent on. Like if I missed it, like I would feel the withdrawal symptoms and everything. And um, so they started to wean me off. And during that weaning off process, I I think this is where the mental health part really kind of started to kick in. Was I was out of the hospital, but I couldn't live a normal life, and I was just frustrated, I was down on myself. I just, like, didn't know what to do, and, the medication they gave me made me feel good. So, I
Yeah.
would sometimes skip doses just to take an extra one the next day and things like that, super unhealthy. When I'm supposed to be weaning off, I'm doing the opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate, and let's talk about that a little bit. I appreciate you sharing this part of it because this is an unfortunate reality that sometimes is associated with prescription drugs, medical procedures, and these are absolute necessaries. Especially, they're life saving. We are grateful for those medications, um, but these are some of the outcomes. So I guess share, if you would, um, on you hit on two parts there: the addiction front, but
Mhm.
also kind of the mental health. How did you recognize there's a problem? I think on the addiction part, you've already kind of hit that. Like, I'm going through withdrawals, or I'm self-regulating, self-medicating. But how did you recognize there's a problem, and then, like, what steps uh, do you take, or did you take, to try and break the cycle and get out of that?
Yeah, I actually ended up meeting with a life coach. His name is Alex Olszensky. He's amazing. He focuses on everything from like couples therapy to addiction to breathing exercises, meditation. He kind of covers a lot of things. Um, and so as they put me on to methadone, which is, you know, supposed to interact with the opioid receptors in your brain without like giving you any of the like high, I guess.
Okay.
So they put me on methadone, which is in itself really hard to get off of. But while this process was going on, I was meeting with my life coach, and I had a separate psychiatrist at the time too. So I was working with the psychiatrist on getting my depression and anxiety figured out, and working with the life coach to try to get the addiction figured out. Um, so I tried a couple of antidepressants that, it worked, but it wasn't, great. I still wasn't myself.
How
Um,
did those make you feel?
the first one I tried, I felt like a zombie, and like I knew it wasn't right. And I was like, no, it's not going to work. The next one I tried, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like I didn't know I could feel this way.
Yeah.
But it still wasn't. I would say like on a scale of 1 to 10, I was still at like a 5. So that's not great.
Right.
It's manageable, but I don't think that it's great by any means.
Yeah.
And I didn't think it would be possible to be at a 0 on the depression scale for me after what I went through. So I just kind of said, okay, great, this works. I'll stick with this. Now time to focus on, you know, getting clean from all of this. So once I got on the methadone, I was on that for probably like 6 months. And then to get me off of the methadone, they had to put me on another prescription called clonidine, and I was on that for another 4 or 5 months.
What's the difference on is are they just decreasing, like, the severity of the narcotic, or whatever the medication is?
So the
Are they kinda,
clonidine,
like, working it down?
yeah. So They start with lowering your dose of the painkillers while increasing methadone. Then eventually you'll phase out to just methadone. And then when it's time to get off the methadone, they put you onto the clonidine to help with the withdrawals from the
Man,
opioid withdrawals that are going to happen.
yeah, wow, wow. And you said that was just that one medication was several months. How long? How long was the whole process to work down through the prescriptions?
I think it took me about a year to a year and a half to get off of painkillers completely.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
So that's the and congratulations to you. Like
Thank you.
I respect that and admire that. That's not everybody's journey, you know, and so what about on the mental health side? And I know when we talked briefly prior all this, you know, you'd shared uh, there's some being unmotivated, you know, a little bit of depression in there, being lethargic, like not really getting out. So, what was that kind of journey
Yeah.
like for you?
So depression can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, depends on the person. But for me, it was I just lost literally all motivation. Like I was able to go back to working part time, which was great. But I had no motivation to go above and beyond. I was like, I can do what's necessary and like do a decent job at it, but I didn't have drive to be like, oh, I needed this promotion or like, oh, I can't wait
Yeah,
to go full time. And even things like going to the driving range, like I just wanted to go home and lay on the couch. Going to do anything I enjoy, riding my dirt bike. I just couldn't wait to get back on the couch. Like, and it was
yeah,
crazy. Like I would wake up and check my calendar, and if I didn't have to leave the house that day, that's a great day.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'll be honest, I still have some days like that, you know, but there's a big difference from what I'm saying and what you're saying. So, but as I talk with you now, that's the perception is that that's not where you're at currently. So, kind of what changed? Where was there a turning point? Because now I know you're certainly active and you're setting plans and some goals for the future. So, what was a turning point for you to kind of get out of that funk and to where you are now?
Yeah, it was really tough for me because when you're in that sort of depression, anything that requires more work is something that you're gonna want to push off. Like you
Yeah,
don't want to do extra things. So for me to tell my psychiatrist, like, hey, I don't think my antidepressant's working very well, that would mean, okay, now we have to try another one that might not work for 2 weeks. And if it doesn't work, we'll have to try another one that might not work for 2 weeks.
yeah,
But I said, honestly, like, I just gotta do it because the way I was living, like, wasn't great. Um, so I eventually told my psychiatrist, like, I want to try other options. She completely listened. And then we started, trying new things and found the right combination of things that worked. And I honestly feel like myself again. And I never thought that that would ever happen. I
yeah.
feel like pre-cancer 2012 me, like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
So, what
yeah.
were some of those things, if you don't mind sharing?
What were some of the medications?
Well, you said that there were, you know, adjustments and some changes that you guys made. So, what were some of the changes that helped
Yeah.
turn that around?
Yeah. So, I changed the antidepressant I was on. I am now on Prozac. Um, and then for the lack of energy, I think when I when I explained it to you like previously, it like felt like I had a weighted vest on at all times.
Yeah.
And so just like getting off the couch to do anything was just brutal. But so I added a medication which helps with the energy side of depression. And then I had a lot of PTSD from being in the ICU for almost 2 weeks and everything that happened. So,
Oh
built up
wow.
a lot of anxiety through that.
Yeah.
Got on a new anxiety medication. And then finally, the last big difference was um, my body had a really hard time adjusting to not having a stomach. So it was really hard for me to keep food down, like all the time. I would throw up multiple times a day, every day. Like it was awful. But then while we were doing all the other medication switches, my doctor was like, why don't we try to do this proactively instead of reactively? Because it used to be like I'd throw up, then take my medicine, and then I wouldn't throw up for the rest of the day. So
Got
she's
it.
like,
Yeah.
try it proactively, see how it works. So I take it in the morning, it like settles my gut. I actually have an appetite for breakfast. Um, and that combination of things, like the energy, the lack of anxiety, the lack of throwing up, just really changed my life, like
Yeah.
completely.
And I appreciate you hitting on both of the kind of both areas there, because it's important to acknowledge that it does take both and to address both sides. The medication, but also so like not just the physical aspect, but the psychological impacts. And as you said, the anxiety, the depression, PTSD. Um, that's not one that a lot of people share and talk about, but I think a lot of people experience it, and so thank you
Yeah,
for talking about that. I guarantee that somebody that's gonna be watching this in the future, to some extent, will be going through a similar scenario. So, what if you can kind of speak to them? What advice would you offer to that listener, that viewer
yeah.
that's dealing with addiction or depression, and they've come across your story here or
Mhm.
somewhere else, and they're looking for some inspiration?
My biggest thing is I understand the avoidance of more responsibility when you have to make these changes. It's going to require more effort. And at that point in your life, you just want everything to be low effort. But putting in the effort for three 3 weeks, if you find the right medication right away, it's only 3 weeks. Like it's so worth it. Like you're gonna wish you did it years before. I
Yeah,
think just being open and honest with yourself, open and honest with a therapist, psychiatrist, life coach, loved ones, anyone you feel comfortable talking to. And I know that you're gonna be like, oh, but then that brings on like they're always gonna check in on me and all of that. Yes, that's true, but it's just because they care. And after a few weeks, you'll be glad that they're checking in on you because you'll have great things to report. So I think that was a big thing for me, for sure.
yeah, good, good. Speaking of big things to report, you you've come around, you've gotten active, and I kind of hit on this earlier. I'm following you on Strava. Of course, I love running, and
Mhm.
so I found you on there, and been watching you get out there and get after it. So, um, it took some time, but maybe how long was it between coming out of the hospital, going through this journey, and then finally lacing up those shoes?
Oh,
Um,
God.
and 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 then also why running? For you personally.
Yeah. So I grew up playing sports, all of them: football, basketball, volleyball, soccer, track, dirt biking, skateboarding, everything, you name it. But my parents were big runners.
Okay.
and I never understood it. I was like, that's so boring. Like, why would you want to just run? Um, but so I obviously go to races with them, and if they're doing like a half marathon, I do like the 10K. And this is like back before middle school, like fifth, sixth grade.
Okay.
Um, so I was always around it. I would go to their marathons, and I've been to an Ironman. I've seen like how cool it is and the vibe there. Um, and so it's something that like has always been in the back of my mind of something that I've been around, know about, been a little bit interested in. Um, and then now it just kind of seemed like the perfect sport for me because it's literally up to me to do it at my own pace.
Okay.
So I
Yeah.
can start wherever I want and just build from there. But back to how long it took for that question, I would say I was in the hospital, so May to May. So probably 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll brag on you for a minute. You said you can kind of choose your own pace. You've been kind of killing it lately. I've
Yeah.
seen you hitting some records. I know you've got some races coming up, some runs races um, in the next few months. So share that. What's coming up on your radar here pretty soon? And then you've set a pretty ambitious goal for next year as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that I'm killing it because it actually took a long time to get there in itself.
Um, you got like new PRs
Yeah.
and everything popping up on there. So
Yeah.
kudos to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. When I first started back in May, I would do 30 minutes walking, 1 minute running, and just increase that for the next week. Then I'd do a minute walking, 2 minutes running. So it was a long process because I'm coming from literally no exercise. Like
Yeah.
I was on the couch, I was in the hospital, like not doing much.
Yeah.
So I just knew that I had to be patient. Um, I was I loved the zone 2 training. I thought it was great. Stuck with that, then became addicted, and now I'm like you said, setting PRs, and it feels great. So decided to sign up for my first half marathon since having cancer. So that one will be November 18th in Davis, California.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then do you I believe that you had another one scheduled out there, or at least you're thinking about it. Is that right?
So yeah, that I'm scheduled for November 18th, and then December 10th I have another half here in Roseville.
Man, that's awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. Um, yeah. So what what's that looking like for you? You know, when we touched base a little while ago, you were indicating I can't just lace up my shoes and get out the door. So,
Yeah.
what is just the not marathon prep, but just get outside and run prep? A daily preparation. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So typically when I'm planning on a any distance run, really, I love coffee, so I got to have coffee first thing. Um,
Absolutely.
but I found that, heavy carbs before is definitely makes a big difference. But since I don't have a stomach, eating a full bagel takes quite a long time.
Okay.
And so I have to get through a whole bagel, and then I have to get through like at least 20 fluid ounces of electrolytes, which also takes a long time because I can't just chug the thing. So I'd say
Hmm.
like the whole process of starting to be like, okay, I'm going to go for a run to actually getting out the door can range anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how I'm feeling that day.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So any of you that are coming up with excuses, we're removing those right now. So Yeah, get out there.
Yes.
Um, so, all right, we got, on the 18th and then on the 10th,
Then the
and
big one.
then yeah, then you've got your eyes set on even more ambitious goals. So tell me about next year.
So yeah, next year I'm signed up for the Santa Rosa Full Marathon on August 20th. This is a big one. I've never run a full before. So I'm excited. I just met with my GI doctor and he gave me the green light to do it. So that was great news.
Good. Yeah,
And this one, I want it to be special. So I'm going to do a fundraiser for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Try to raise some money for them because, I just need people to be aware of how intense cancer can be and how life-changing it is. And
mhm,
people hear cancer and think, "Oh, it's scary," but like it changes your life completely. I did not when I was diagnosed at 25, I thought that, "Oh, in a couple of years I'll have my normal life back." But it just changes your perspective, it changes your body, like it's a different normal. It's right now I'm at a great normal. I'm the happiest I've ever been, but it's definitely more than just a physical illness that people think it is.
yeah. Well, you're transitioning right into my next, I guess, question perfectly there, and real fast jumping back on this, full marathon,
Mhm.
Kevin, you will do it. I know you will,
Thank you.
and, yeah, we're gonna be cheering you on along the way. The LLS, that's awesome. That's you and I have several, kinda like I say 6 degrees of separation as we talked on the phone, different communities, neighborhoods that we grew up in or went to school
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
including this. So, with multiple myeloma, it's a blood cancer and it falls in with the LLS. That's where they do fundraising, research, awareness, and everything too. So,
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I was gonna ask, this whole journey, which thank you for sharing with us. And you
Of course.
were rolling into that right now. You were kinda already hitting on it. How has it impacted you or changed your perspective in life, health, and resiliency?
Oh, man. We can do hard things. Way harder things than we thought we were capable of.
Yeah,
Um, and I'm sure you hear that from a lot of endurance athletes, but I think coming from cancer patients, it kind of means a whole different thing, has more weight
yeah,
to it.
absolutely.
Um, when you're told you have stage 4 cancer and then 4 years later are running a full marathon, like that's the definition of resiliency. And I think you just gotta um, keep your mental health in order the best you can. I think that if your mental health is in a good place, everything else will follow. Um, and I think that it is difficult to start that discussion with people because there is a stigma about it. But I think taking care of mental health first, everything else kind of just falls into place after that.
Yeah, yeah. So, as we're shifting gears here and we're kind of, talking to somebody out there watching, listening right now, what would you say to maybe that person that's, just received that diagnosis? If you think back to May 2019 for you,
Yep.
um, they're scared, they're at the beginning of this journey. What would you share with them right now or say?
I would say this is very cliche, but you have to stay positive. And a lot of times it's going to be one step forward, two steps back, but you have to realize that you have to keep pushing forward or else it'll just be constant steps back. So you got to stay motivated and just know that even if it seems like it's a long way away, there is an end to the journey. So, it might not be as soon as you would like, or you could think that you're almost there and then have a huge setback. So I would just say keep an open mind, stay motivated, and just know that you will get there at some point.
Yeah. Slow progress is still progress, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you got to reward yourself for the little things. Like, hey, I walked around the block today. Sweet. Like, that's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. So, did you have, or do you currently have, a quote, a mantra, a picture, a meme, anything like that that gets you up when you're just not feeling like it?
Uh, the whole time I was in the hospital, when I was having some of my hardest operations, getting that giant needle through my chest, I was just looking up. I would just repeat to myself, it's temporary, it's temporary, it's temporary, it's temporary. And from then on, it's just, oh, you're staying in the hospital for the rest of your treatment. It's temporary, it's temporary. And eventually you get through it. Like, it's not going to last forever.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so remember that, mile 20 to 26.2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uh, so, one thing that you've been beautifully crafting and weaving it through this whole, conversation, but that's, the importance and the impact that your family, your friends, you from the outside looking in, you've got quite a community there. And I saw a video, and it was quite long, of just early on when you were in the hospital, friend after friend after friend, just giving a support message,
Hmm.
and give wishing their best, showing love and everything. You talked about, your then fiance, which, sounds like a great woman. You decided to go ahead and marry her.
Yes.
um, Probably a good choice, Kevin.
Yeah.
and and then, your family. Saw their, in every picture you're surrounded by people that loved you and poured into you. It's just very overwhelming. So, how important was that for you? And what impact did that, have on you throughout, the last couple years and during that time?
Yeah, I'm very, very fortunate because I know not everybody has a support system like I do. I have a number of very, very close friends that, were there for me for everything. I have close family that would do anything for me. It's just, it was amazing to watch them like all rally, and they all had their separate jobs to do, like to help me out, and they all just did it seamlessly, and it was, yeah, I couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah, yeah. That was very clear,
Hmm.
and one, I know you have a very positive attitude, and that, as I was going through, somewhere, and I have to go back in my notes, but one of your nurses, let me go. It'll take just a second.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, one of your nurses. There's a quote here, just that, Kev, you filled this hospital with so much hope, and so, for you, to be encouraging others, even when you were going through all of that, speaks, testament to you, but also as a reflection of your friends and family and that support group that you had. So,
Definitely.
um, very awesome. I was very encouraged by that. So, as we kind of wrap up here, some of the big takeaways, if I could share with you,
Hmm.
I appreciate hitting on, and thank you very much, the mental health, and sharing about I'll just say the darker sides, that can come along with, cancer diagnosis, or really anytime you're exposed to prescription medications, long term, procedures, or stays in the hospital, anything like that. There is that element of risk, and so I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing about that. But big takeaway is just be honest. Be honest with yourself and share with others. Um, and make the necessary changes. That maybe that day you may not feel like doing it, but you will be grateful. It's literally changed your life, Kevin.
Yeah.
So again, that's awesome for you, and a lot of respect and kudos to you for being honest, for reaching out, and for making the changes at a time that you just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so, great line you said. It's so worth it.
Yeah.
So that's you're now your journey's going to be forever, but you're at a point now where you've gotten through a lot of that fog and the thick of it, and you're out and active and being able to enjoy and go live your life. So hey, we could do hard things. You're speaking my language. I love that. Yeah, so we absolutely can. Yeah, prioritize mental health, and I love that line. It's temporary. It's temporary. It's temporary. So
Yeah.
yeah, very cool. So what I'd like to do, because we've kind of got a snapshot of the last couple years here, but
Mhm.
you've really in the immediate future, you've got a continuation of that story, and so um, you are going to finish this. You're going to get these two halves done. Continue building up your training, and you're going to knock out that full later on next year.
Yep.
So I'd like to get you back at some point and talk about this next year. So
Yeah.
from now until you finish that full marathon in Santa Rosa next August.
Yep.
So I'd like to get you back on. I want to get updates. Obviously, I'm staying connected with you,
Yeah.
but I want to get some updates so that I could share that with others.
For sure.
And then when you do start raising, when you kind of fire up the fundraising efforts for LLS, then we'll make sure we provide a link and everything
Yeah, that'd be
uh,
great.
during that time too. So yeah, absolutely.
Love to do that.
Um, yeah, so, just real quick, if, somebody wanted to reach out, I know and going as we started, we were talking about Dylan. That's one thing that Dylan did very well is he communicates. He talks
Mhm.
with other athletes, he talks with other, people that are in similar situations, and it's very impactful. So, if somebody wanted to reach out to you for whatever reason, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. It's just you can search my first and last name. I'd say I probably check Instagram the most out of those. But yeah, open to anybody that has any questions, mental health, addiction, cancer, running, anything at all. I'd love to have a chat. So yeah, that's the best place to find me.
Absolutely. Very cool. Kevin, man, this has been a great time, and thank you for sharing your story. It's a story that needs to be shared. It's a great story, and that story's not over, brother. And so, thank you so much for being on the Cancer Athlete podcast today. We're gonna keep in touch. We're gonna keep following up with you, and looking forward to watching you knock out these two halves and then finishing a full next year. So
Sweet. Thank you,
thank you
Mike.
so much for spending time with us, and take care, brother.
Sweet. Thanks for having me on, Mike. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Pleasure's ours. See ya.
See ya.
Wow. So any of you that are coming up with excuses, we're removing those right now. So yeah, get out there.